Our next speaker is Brent Ratliff. Brent's with the Ani-Tek company, and he's going to tell us how to feed our pigs at extremely low cost, I think is the exact presentation he's going to give us. Was supposed to be with Dr. Aaron Gaines, who had a personal issue come up, but Brent has the unfortunate pleasure of working with Dr. Gaines at Ani-Tek, as I did at Mash-Offs for many years, and we certainly wish Aaron the best. Please send him our best, Brent. With that, I'll turn it over to Brent.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, no, Aaron's dad had some health issues, but all is well there. Just some timing things, and so I got the phone call there yesterday. Needed me to step in here, so glad to do it. Aaron does a good job with his presentations. Puts them forward, I think, in a real, while maybe not always the simplest of issues, but puts them together in a way that is fairly simple to understand, straightforward. If you know Aaron. You know that it comes down to a few things: a process, get it done, monitor it, and move forward fast and effectively. So we'll try to roll through this. I have his notes, so some of it may be a little cumbersome, but we'll get through it, and I think there's some valuable information here. Real quick, my background, there's three of us at Ani-Tek, myself, Aaron, and then Dr. James Ushery. Stood Ani-Tek up about 5 years ago. Worse than you, I've had the pleasure, I guess you could say, of knowing Aaron since I was in middle school, actually. There might have been some basketball games played at his house with his little brother and I that weren't always the most friendly, but they were competitive. If you know Aaron, that's definitely going to always be the case. Actually, I ended up going to the University of Missouri, got my master's there. That was all because of Aaron. He brought me in there, not because I was intelligent, not because I could do anything other than I knew how to weigh pigs and move finishing hogs. So the benefits of growing up on a small family farm there in Northeast Missouri. All right, so today here we'll just look real quick at the dynamics of feeding the pig here this last year. We'll do a little history there just to make sure we understand where we are, why this has become such a big issue, or what those numbers look like. You know, the whole sustainability piece of high energy diets, we all know what fat prices have been doing. Make sure we're looking at that, understanding the true ramifications, the economics of those, and then just a handful of nutritional strategies, you know, that we can be looking at when we have these high diet costs. Make sure I have the right pointer here. You know, the big thing here, these start on the left there back in July of 2020. This is just feed costs that were generated from Midwest toll mills. So these wouldn't necessarily be, you know, integrator-owned feed mills. These would be a very nice average of what would be represented across all the Midwest from toll mills, okay? And this would be your feed cost in the dollars per pig. As you look at these numbers, you see number one here from July of 2020, you got into 2022 there, middle of the year, you looked at a doubling in your cost of feed just on a per pig basis. So fairly dramatic increases. If you look at some of these numbers, I think there's some that pop up. Maybe not, but you know, you can just look over here. We went from, you know, first half of 2021 at $96. You know, that's where we saw that $20 pig increase. Put that in perspective, though, here we saw over a $20, $30 a per pig increase, too. So we're dealing with some fairly significant high feed prices. Hey, maybe we've got a little bit of relief here into 2023 with the corn crop. We're hoping that even we get a little more yet. As you look at the 2X factor, this is just relative to 2020 corn price. So you've seen about a 2X increase. You see there in 2021 where we were at the top, $5.99, first half of 22, and then here where we've been in 2023. So hopefully that continues. You know, I was just reading, I think it was Jim Long's report this morning here, or his commentary, you know, over 15 billion bushel. I just love saying billions and billions. Nobody gets that. Just Google Trump and billions and you'll be entertained for hours. But we're looking at over a 15 billion bushel corn crop, you know, $4.59 a bushel new crop corn price. I think he said the last time we saw that level of production was 2016, and we saw a $3.65 corn price. I'm not going to get into the business of suggesting I have any idea where any of these commodities are going, but it does sound like there's a chance that we're going to continue in the right direction as it relates to pig feed cost. Soybean meal. We in the nutrition area, we heard a lot about this. Okay, so we're 1.6 the price that we were back in 2020. We actually heard the conversation. This gets into the whole biofuels as well, right? There were some projections of soybean meal price dropping as they needed to meet those biofuel demands. We haven't seen that. I think we've, in the nutrition area at least, we spent some time and energy into looking at research and what we needed to do. If it did get there, hey, that may still come into play, but we're not there yet. If anything, as you look at the first half of 21, 22, 23, you would actually see we're actually still higher than where we were. Same thing on distillers, it's kind of followed that same trend. And then we'll jump into the whole fat dynamics a little bit more, but this is the one that, when we highlighted there, when Aaron put this together and he was highlighting the fact of what are we going to do with high energy diets, that's where this really comes back to, and the fact that, we're over 2.25x where we were, and that's actually some relief compared to it. If you look at the actual numbers, I think from back in 2020, we actually saw a tripling of fat price. So significant increases, and that really will lead us into this next topic on, will fat get cheaper in the future? Once again, I'm going to stay away from suggesting I know where these commodities are going, but we do know that, there's definitely some renewable fuel standards out there that have been put in place that we're going to have to meet, or we're going to try. And that would suggest that we're going to have to double vegetable oil production to meet those demands. And so, there has been significant crush capacity expansion. Where all this goes is to be determined here, but I don't think there is. I think we'd all agree that there's probably not a high likelihood of seeing cheaper fat anytime soon, or at least going back to where we were back in 2020. All right, so roll through just a handful of diet formulation things, and I maybe got ahead of myself a little bit on that slide, but we'll roll through just kind of maybe a list here of things that we can do. Number one, it's interesting. I probably have a little different perspective on this when I hear Aaron put this presentation together, or when I heard him kind of talk through it. I have the outside looking in, right? I was the technical sales guy selling to Aaron for many years while he was at Mash-Offs. And so just a little different perspective. And when I hear that maintain investment in nursery pig diets, I quickly go back to the story that I've heard him mention. And there were times as he was the nutritionist for Mash-Off and production, you're always challenged on reducing those feed costs. And these experiences must be painful because they always come back, and I know there was a point where he tried to do that, right? There were some things that they implemented into production, and if I remember correctly, it only took about 3 or 4 weeks before there was a lot of, heat being applied that things need to be changed back. And he remembers that, and I think that really impacts his philosophy, and that going cheap on that nursery diet can at times, I don't want to speak to all scenarios, but can at times get you into a little bit of a bind. We'll go through the specific nutrient specifications, and this will show you some calculators and some models for some of this, but really performance, so maximizing performance versus the economics of that. Look at the nutrient requirements and the major players of how do we formulate amino acids, energy, phosphorus, and making sure we understand those requirements. I said earlier, Aaron's always big into processes, but a calculator is something that you can look at on a monthly basis, weekly basis, whatever that is, to make sure that you're keeping those things current, to know where we're at and where you should be on those specific nutrients and different options there, and so on. So, all right. This is just to try to make an example or have an example for nursery diet formulation. Why to be careful as we try to reduce cost in that nursery. This was 8 commercial trials over 23,000 pigs. And this was generically, it was a reduced cost program versus a standard program. You can see there that once you got that out into the field, there was a 1.5% mortality. What's a percent worth? Probably 50 cents to $1 a pig. So, there's you $1.50 a pig. What could you have spent, or what did you save, or what did it cost? However you want to look at that on a reduced cost program in the nursery. But we just need to be careful. That's probably not the best place to reduce cost when we're looking at formulation. All right, so here I'm going to jump into a couple calculators. I see several K-Staters in the audience. Obviously, they have been very valuable to the industry. And when we get into this energy formulation, there's a calculator that they have put together that I know Aaron monitors and uses on a regular basis and has found a lot of value in. I know it would line up well with what he's seen historically in his past life data, and I know all of those guys are always communicating, and so anyhow, we put a lot of value on this. This would be one that we'd recommend using. Get into it, we need to always keep in mind the whole fixed time scenario versus a fixed weight scenario, right? I think we all understand that. It's interesting, as I'm not sure of the formulation. As I was going through this, it used to be that there was a lot of times that there's different formulation strategies for both of those. I'm not sure the economics are there today to suggest that there's a drastic of a difference between fixed time and fixed weight scenarios. But nonetheless, we'll look at those and at least look at those differences and put it into perspective, get it down to a dollars per pig basis. All right. I don't want to skip any of the key points here. All right, so as we look at this calculator K-State, I believe it's on the website. I'm sure it is. Everything else is, all of this. And so you have the fixed time scenario that we'll look at first. They do it nicely where they look at a fixed time and a fixed weight scenario as well. Really what this has boiled down to, they've done a great job, and I had to kind of understand this as I was going through this and thinking about it here last night, this morning. And it's simple, right? Or it sounds simple, right? But we have our inputs, so we get our diets, we run our formulation, we input those diet cost into the formulation. We have our diets, and then we have what basically they're going to request you formulate them to their energy values, and then you're going to get that output on what that value proposition is. The second part of this is that it shows you the performance, and this is kind of small, but hopefully you can see it here. You see, we put our current diets in there. So Aaron went through and did what his current diets were, not really his current, but we wanted to run a 1.5 to 2% fat diet. I'm going to back up here, slow down. But so 1.5, 2% diet would be what is current, right? And then recommended would be these energy levels. They're going to be basically a no added fat diet. What's going to happen to performance when you go to that, right? You're going to see a 1.2% reduction in gain when you go to low energy diets. You're going to see a 3.6% reduction in feed conversion. You're going to actually see an increase in feed conversion, sorry. You're going to see an increase in feed intake and a reduction in carcass yield. So we know that when we do reduce energy in these diets, those things are going to happen. But at the end of the day, what we really care about and what's important is the dollars per pig. So if you look at these scenarios, current versus, which would be, let's say, 1.5 to 2% added fat to no added fat, you're looking at, in a fixed time scenario, that costing, if the carcass weights are 120, that's costing you $3.37 a pig. And even at lower prices, right, it's costing you even more, $4.24 per pig. So it's getting pretty expensive to try to have added fat in those diets. As I look at this, I know we all feed added fat at times for dust control, other things. It's just getting expensive to add fat to these diets. All right, so you look at a fixed weight scenario. In a fixed weight scenario, one would think that maybe that's where fat would be valuable, but in this case, it's still costing you over $4 to add fat to those diets on a per pig basis. So take away from this, man, added fat is pretty expensive. So if it's something you're going to be doing, You really probably need to be understanding if there's other reasons and what the respective value of those reasons are. All right. This is a PIC calculator. This gets into should we be feeding for maximum performance, right, or should we be, feeding for economical value, right? And so in this calculator, basically you're punching in your diets once again. At the end of the day, if you're going to feed to optimum performance, say 100% of the amino acid levels, that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you can see here, bottom line is feeding to 97.5% versus 100% of the biological requirement of that pig. If you fed 100%, it's costing you 56 cents per pig on a fixed weight system, or 20 cents per pig on a fixed time system. So once again, maybe we don't need to maximize performance, we need to maximize economical return. All right. Distillers, right? Another thing, we all are, I think the majority of us are very comfortable using distillers. I think there's just some things there that we always need to remember as we're utilizing those ingredients. It is interesting to me to think of an ingredient that has as much as a 15 to 20% change in energy value over the last, let's say, 5 years. If it wasn't for it being labeled a byproduct, I'm not sure you could keep the same name of an ingredient and have that drastic of a change in nutrient composition, right? That's fairly significant change for what it is. And what I'm referring to is that today we have some distillers that would be as much as 6% lower oil than other sources, right? And best way to think about that is a 2.5 to 3x reduction in energy, right? So if it's a 6% reduction in oil, it'd be a 15% reduction in energy value. So there's just been a lot of things with distillers that have changed that we really need to keep in mind. Does that feed mill have a single source, or are there multiple sources coming into that same bin, right? How do you manage that? How do you navigate that? Are you using different sources at different mills, your loading values? I think if you've ever heard Wayne Cass speak on the whole concept of loading values, what's all been drilled into every nutritionist's head, that we need to make sure we have those right. It is absolutely something we should utilize. It's something, though, that we need to make sure we understand, because failure to understand those loading values and nutrient levels of those ingredients could very easily wash away any financial benefits to using them. Another Wayne Cass slide. He likes this, right? It's just kind of a red light, yellow light, green light, kind of a risk assessment, easy way to look at this. If you don't have lab analysis or growth assay on the distiller source you're using, hey, that's a high risk. If you have lab analysis, but you don't have the growth assay, a moderate risk. And if you have both of those, hey, it's a low risk. Sounds great, but making sure that you actually have those on multiple sources across multiple mills just can really complicate things. I always look at this and begin to understand or try to think about the dollar impacts all of these things have, and really think through how much money and time we could spend on making sure we understand these. So analytics, tracking all of those things. All right. All right, this was just understanding amino acid levels. All right, so I know we're maybe taking a step back and looking at maximum synthetic L-lysine levels by growth, but I think of this really as just a practical approach to taking a look at diets, saying, are we in line? Are we pushing the envelope? Where do we stand? All right. Yes, there's other amino acids. We don't want to get into that. What I want to say is that I think Bart did a really good job. Bart Borg did a really good job in this Feedstuffs article of giving us a practical guideline to quickly assess diets and say, are we pushing the envelope? Are we using enough? Are we using too much? And how does that fit? And so Bart did a good job here. You can just see, maximum L-lysine levels. So as you look at those diets, this would be lysine HCl, right, on a dry basis. You can see these levels. need to be a little bit careful when you get into these heavyweight pigs. There starts to be some yield drag, some different things going on. I don't want to dive into that, but I think, once again, I think Bart did a good job of saying, hey, here are some maximum levels to get to. Take a look at those diets. Probably some further discussion around ratios and all that, but more complex than what we'll get into today. Feed processing, once again, probably an easier thing, something that you can look at today, you can impact tomorrow. I kept asking for more details on this as we were talking through it. Interesting, one of the first things that came up was, well, practically, what does this mean? Well, roller mills, in his past life, they were calibrating or checking those roller mills on particle size, the respective mills, 4 times a day. It was that important on a roller mill, on seasonality, moisture level on corn. That was something that was actually feasible. On a hammer mill, hey, maybe not, right? 1 time a day, you're not going to have as much adjustment, those type of things. But particle size is critical. If you look through here, and I want to reference, the table was Wandra, and it is interesting. We're seeing about, 13 cents feed, basically every 100 microns is worth about $1 a pig, right? So, make sure we're getting that there. So if you were at a 750 micron, drop it to 550 if they were coarse, right, $2 a pig. So some significant dollars when you look at the total dollars of feed cost and so on and so forth. And this is where, like I alluded to, how much money and time you can spend in making sure you're getting the particle size that you're requesting, and also how big of an impact if said feed mill or toll mill isn't getting the job done, what they're costing you on a per pig basis can be very significant. All right. PIC data. Really, this graph just sets up particle size basically in a meal diet, right? 1,200 micron, your feed conversion, linear response. As you reduce micron size, improve feed conversion. All right, I think that's fairly typical. I think the nuance or the newness to this data that maybe we haven't maybe always said was the case was here at this 550 micron break on pellets. And once you got to 550, there wasn't a whole lot of improvement in feed conversion, lowering it beyond that. I'm going to be the first to admit this isn't an area I'm expert in. I think Aaron's comments were simply that, hey, newer data would be great if it's correct. There's some things in his history that would suggest that maybe this is right, and there's also some things that maybe there needs to continue to compile data to validate this, right? So maybe not 100% yet, but it is interesting. Where that really leads into is the fact that, if we do these pelleted diets and you get down in these lower micron sizes, what impact that has on ulcers, right? And that previous calculation, here where we were saving, if we, 200 micron difference and we were saving $2 or $1 per 100 microns, that there's no mortality morbidity figured into this. So we just need to make sure that if you believe there is mortality morbidity with that reduction in particle size, that comes into the calculations. All right. And then feed processing, pelleting, right? I think, in the Southeast, extremely common. Midwest, I think, as you have the ability or as you have the operationally the capabilities, definitely something that brings some value. There's several different, what we want to say, benefits, right? Showed that, you can grind finer. We saw the feed conversion improvements on what that means. Are we able to use some other alternative ingredients when we put it in a pelleted form? Just throughput, being able to feed through feeders, so on and so forth when it gets to production. Looking at the economics, right, of pelleting, meal versus pellet. Down here we kind of list through some of the more recent studies and what those average improvements in feed conversion would be, and average daily gain. this model, as put the numbers up here, we use the low range of that. I think experience would suggest that, yeah, while in an experimental situation you get towards the higher end of those improvements, when you apply it commercially, you usually end up on the lower side of what those improvements would be. And so that's what the model's based on. So even assuming some of the lower levels of improvements that you would see in pelleting from the most recent research, you're still looking at over $2 a pig on improving or reducing feed cost using pellet versus meal. Once again, need to just make sure we mention, I mean, I think there's been times in certain systems that you need to be watching mortality when you do this. I think a lot of that probably goes back to ulcers and particle size. Okay. All right, feed additives. Really nice review done by the K-State group once again for growth performance. They basically go through all of the, I don't want to speak for them, but go through a historical analysis, meta-analysis of a lot of the papers looking at feed additives in the grow finish period, right? Seeing some nice responses at times, in copper, L-carnitine, multi-enzymes, basically 2% improvement, right? Still a low percent improvement that we have to be able to pick up. Same thing with feed efficiency, right? So there were a handful of them that did show a nice improvement. This data set didn't get into reviewing antimicrobials or ionophores, schisis, those type of things. So limited in scope from that standpoint. But really what I want to focus on, or what I want to comment on, is remembering those percentage improvements. And if we are going to do an evaluation on these things, really all we're looking at is a 1 to 2% improvement in the response. Okay, and that's one that works. So we're talking about a fairly, what I'd say, a small response that we have to be able to pick up, and that really becomes a difficult thing. I think we've all learned in the last several years that our data sets and our research trials, one, we have to rep the living heck out of them, get more replications per treatment to be able to pick up these smaller and smaller differences. Two, we need to repeat them. And that gets into point two, a meta-analysis of all of the data. We need to, on these grow finish technologies where we're looking at that, picking up that small of a difference, we need to make sure we take a large amount of data, try to pool it to be able to become confident, that those are working. And then we also jump into that third point there. They do have to work on top of your current feed program. And I think all of this and the lack of clarity maybe within this is why I think we all know it is fairly difficult to get these grow finish feed additive technologies to work consistently. It just makes it a harder decision for everybody involved on spending that money. But there are absolutely some, I don't want to take away from it, there are absolutely things that do work. All right, so wrap up here. Diet formulation should focus on ensuring expensive nutrient levels are set at economic optimum. I think that's where all those calculators and such models, are helpful in making sure that we're looking at those on a regular basis to make sure we're optimizing economics. Make sure we're utilizing those corn co-products, make sure our synthetic amino acids are at the appropriate level. And then particle size, we hear that every time, but I think it continues to be very critical. And then the use of additives once we have something that we believe would work for our system. So with that, we'll wrap up. I thank you for your patience on that. Hopefully there was some value, and we'll answer questions if we can.
Give Brent a hand. All right. Any questions for Brent? I got one real quick, Brent. You mentioned lab analysis and growth assays as it relates to distillers. Is there any publicly available data out there for producers to grab? Or if you want to do that, you always got to do that work yourself for your situation?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I'm not sure I'm the one that's going to have the answers for it. I may age myself here, but historically the University of Minnesota has done a really good job with the database on analysis. Would anybody else have a out there? But there absolutely are some, and I think you have to use what you can there for sure.
So it's worth looking.
Absolutely.
Very good. All right, another round of applause for Brent.